Welcome into this edition of the Roundball Report. I'm Monica McNutt, and we're definitely going to talk about Dwight Howard, his press conference, and potentially what he could do right here in D.C. with the Wizards. Joining me for the first block of the show are my guys, Mike Sykes of SB Nation, Bullets Forever, the blog, and Armon Lee of the Quarterlee Report, the podcast. Hey, fellas.
Hey. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
Well, you know, I started in Richmond, Virginia, and I learned how to do this, and then I went to
All right, nice. Okay, so let's jump right into it, though, Armon. Mike, you and I were at the press conference. Armon, avid NBA fan. Pressers are typically rosy, right? Everything's optimistic. Exactly. We're undefeated at this point. You're going to play defense. You're going to be the missing piece. Are you buying it at all?
I think that the potential for Dwight Howard and the Wizards to be a successful union is fairly, decent. I'm not going to say that this catapults them into the NBA Finals, but based on where the Wizards were in their cap situation, they needed to do something, right? Complacency is the enemy of any real success, whether it's in your personal life, your personal relationships, career, whatever.
You better give us a word on the Roundball Report.
So, they needed to do something. You saw, we talked about Toronto. Yeah. We talked about Philadelphia, Boston even. Boston beat the Wizards 2 years ago in the playoffs, and they are now significantly better. The Raptors beat the Wizards in the playoffs last season, and now they are significantly better. The Wizards needed to do something, and with the limited resources that they had, Dwight was easily the best of a bad situation.
All right, so Mike, you and I were there, and we both kind of agreed that this was odd.
Yeah, it's really odd. The only thing that I'm quite sure of today after the press conference is that Dwight Howard really knows how to win press conferences. And he knows how to win people over, right? He says all the right things. I'm going to play defense. I'm going to run hard. I'm going to block shots. I'm going to dunk over people. But I guess when it gets to October, November, we'll see. When it's, when we're in January and they're playing in Sacramento and the game doesn't feel like it matters very much, we'll see if he actually backs up this talk. But everyone seems to believe in what he's saying and believe in the fit that, Dwight brings to D.C. So we'll see.
A couple of things he said that sort of stood out to me. One, he admitted that this was a place he hoped to retire from, which I thought was bold considering his track record and all the teams that he's been educated by. But he also said that he was looking forward to playing with John. And I think that is enticing for so many players if you're going to make D.C. a destination. But when I think of the offense that we saw this past season, I don't know that it's going to work as well as we would think.
Yeah, you and I have talked about this in the past. Like when the Wizards, it's so weird when you think of the Wizards this past season. When the ball moves, they played such a successful style of basketball. They won even without John Wall. They're a special player. So you would think that the coaching staff, the front office would do things to better utilize their ball movement, their player movement without the ball. Dwight doesn't necessarily take away from that depending on how he's utilized. It basically comes down to how much confidence do you have in Scott Brooks, John Wall, and to a lesser extent, Bradley Beal and Dwight Howard. Will they buy into pick and rolls, moving without the basketball, alley-oops, or will they just kind of fall back into their default of isolation basketball?
What's your expectation of this team, Mike? We're going to turn the page.
I think they're boom or bust. Honestly, it's either 50 wins, 50-plus wins, or they miss the playoffs completely. 30 wins, 27 wins, something like that. They're either going to be great or they're going to be horrible. I don't think there's a middle ground with this team simply because when things go bad, the locker room tends to implode on itself, right? And you add another bubbly personality in Dwight Howard, right? And that's just another variable that you kind of have to account for. So I don't know. It depends on how they start, I think. And if they start well, I think they'll end well. If they don't, then we'll see.
And being healthy, knock on wood. Hopefully the Wizards can stay healthy this season. All right, so we're talking about the Wizards and where they'll land in the East. But arguably, the best team in the East, I think not many people are going to contend this at this point due to the big trade that went down, becomes the Toronto Raptors acquiring Kawhi Leonard. DeMar DeRozan goes to San Antonio. A whole lot to dissect in this particular trade, y'all. I know, Armon, that you are a big fan of what the Raptors were able to do. Mike, you agree with it, too, for the most part. But what do you think is maybe the nuance of this that people are overlooking?
Well, I think people are just overlooking the simple fact that DeMar DeRozan is a very good player. He was second-team All-NBA last season, is a noted top scorer in the league, has been for years now. I don't think you can add a player like that and necessarily be a bad team or a team that is bound to miss the playoffs. I think, like Armon was saying, the West is very competitive, obviously, and the Spurs barely made it last year, and we say barely, but they won 47 games. The West was that competitive. Right. But I don't know. I just think that given Greg Popovich's track record, you give him a second-team All-NBA player. I don't think he fails with that. I'm sorry. I just don't.
I think kind of what I was talking about a little bit earlier in complacency. Masai Ujiri, in my opinion, correctly, like self-assessment. You have to have self-assessment. You have to know where you are, where you stand. And I think Masai did a great job of understanding the climate, right? I think it's easy for everybody to understand that, you know, Philadelphia and Boston, they are surging. They are ascending. They've got young, potentially like cornerstone players in Embiid, Simmons, and now Jason Tatum, Kyrie Irving, depending on how he recovers from his knee surgery. So they had a 5-6 year window in Toronto, the best stretch run in their entire franchise history, but they kept hitting their ceiling. And I feel this way with the Wizards, with Toronto, with Portland. In the history of the NBA, when you are built through your backcourt, unless you have a Steph Curry, top 15 player of all time, or James Harden, Isaiah Thomas, top 25 players of all time, you won't win anything serious. And Masai, correctly in my opinion, realized that they hit their ceiling, and now he traded maybe the best player in their franchise history to a legit great player in Kawhi Leonard. And now they have a legit chance to not only make their first ever finals in franchise history, but win a championship.
So I hear you on that, but I think, and let's just, hash this out. You got to look at who the Raptors continue to run into in the Eastern Conference, right? Like, is that not a part of this equation at all? I'm not saying that the deal is bad. I think the deal is solid for the reasons that you mentioned. I also think that while everybody was kind of caught up in the emotions of it, DeMar DeRozan, like you said, could be in San Antonio and build something that he could be very proud of. Like, yeah, he's getting older, but he's not, like, on his way to retire in the next couple of years. But in terms of the Raptors hitting that ceiling, you're not giving any wiggle room to running into LeBron?
I think, running into LeBron, obviously, as the Knicks fan, I know firsthand, when you play the best player in the sport, you're going to lose more times than not. And Toronto were the 2000 version of my Knicks with Michael Jordan. However, the way they lost, right? We saw Indiana push these Cavaliers to 7 games. We saw a Celtics team without Gordon Hayward, without Kyrie, push them to 7 games. And to see how Toronto, we literally watched it in real time, them crumble at the mass of playing LeBron. You're paying Lowry $30 million next year and then $30 million after that. You're paying DeMar DeRozan $27, $28 million for 3 more years. That team, as constructed, hit their ceiling. Similar to football, with the way Bill Belichick runs the Patriots, it's better to dish out your assets before or a little bit too early than a little bit too late.
Okay, fair enough. Well, an asset that the Thunder were able to unload is one Carmelo Anthony, temporarily a Hawk. Probably not going to stay that way, likely headed to Houston. Armon on this show said that Carmelo Anthony should be at home on a couch or in Europe.
Prague.
I'm shocked that we're calling Carmelo Anthony an asset.
We're just talking about the money attached, right? Like, value we could argue about. All right, Melo headed to the Rockets. They're going to contend for gold against Golden State. Yay, nay, not buying it at all.
No, there's no way. There's no way. They've lost too many defenders, too many good defenders in Trevor Ariza and Luke Richard and Mbah a Moute. Like, you need to be able to defend everyone on the Warriors at this point.
Right. Yeah.
Right. They have 5 All-Star players that they're going to be able to throw out next season. And you mean to tell me you just lost 2 lockdown defenders that could have guarded Klay Thompson and Kevin Durant? Like, no, there's no. You can't add Carmelo Anthony to this piece and expect the same result.
Defensive Player of the Year, Carmelo Anthony? No, you don't see it?
No, I don't.
Not at all. Armon, you think that the Rockets will become exponentially worse?
Yes, I need Carmelo Anthony's agent to work for me as a life coach. I don't know how this man continues to do it. Every step, Carmelo Anthony will fall forward. Like, he will fall on his face and somehow still rise up the ranks. Like, there was a list. He has made more on-the-court earnings in his career than LeBron James. That is insane to me. He got all his money and then still somehow convinced the team that was 1 hamstring injury away from winning the championship to sign him. For what? Oklahoma City, who lost more games than they did 2 years ago. I don't know what else needs to happen. But God bless Melo, man. Shout out to him and finessing everybody. You know how Drake had the shirt?
Sounds like the Knicks fan.
Yeah, I did.
Yo, dog, don't even start. Yo, this will be a therapy session real quick.
The Drake finesse. All right, guys, so we're getting ready to wrap up this block. It's been real as always. But something that maybe is flying under the radar or something that you've liked over the course of this free agent period? Matter of fact, I'm sorry to cut you off. I just got to throw this out there. So if Dwight Howard is coming to D.C. to make the same amount of money that Boogie Cousins is going to make in Golden State, I get that he's injured. Should the Wizards have made a more serious play?
Yes. But I don't know, when you listen to DeMarcus Cousins talk about his situation, I don't know how honest he is. And number two, it seemed like he was on some revenge. Y'all not gonna pay me money, watch this, I'm gonna go to Golden State.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think DeMarcus was worth it, to be honest. The Achilles rehab is too big of a thing to take on, in my opinion.
Okay. Fair enough. So are you giving Grunfeld his props on this one, guys? Are we
Wouldn't
giving?
necessarily say
No,
that.
not quite.
This is a family prayer program. I wish I could say what I really want to say. Listen to my podcast. You better hear.
Definitely check out the podcast, The Quarterlee Report, hosted by this guy, Armon Lee. And then when you're on SB Nation website checking out the Wizards, it's Bullets Forever. Look for the author, Mike D. Sykes. That would be this gentleman right here. All right, fellas, thanks for joining me for the A Block.